This presentation will review fiduciary relationship, boundaries, and ethics. When viewing this picture, you observe a gentleman trying to push through a visible wall. In healthcare, sometimes that wall is not visible. It's actually an invisible line, and we certainly experience in home care where patients and families will press against this invisible line or a boundary that we've kind of set. And it is important when establishing a therapeutic relationship with families to kind of have this invisible line that says, I can't cross this. With the Ohio Board of Nursing, nursing staff as well as nursing assistants, we are held to boundaries, and that in particular cannot have relationships with a patient, or cannot date a son of a patient, cannot accept money for services and things like that. But some of these things are just maybe just a little bit of crossings. Is really not a boundary violation. So that's where we really want to talk about what is true boundaries, and when we set up fiduciary relationships, how that all kind of comes into play. So with a fiduciary relationship, what that is where one side of the relationship is more dominant, and it's this lopsided relationship. So in healthcare, we have this relationship where the staff knows a lot more about the patient than what the patient knows about, the healthcare workers. They are accepting us to come into their home. Obviously we know a lot of demographic information as a nurse or a social worker or aide. I get to really know that patient well, and even as a volunteer, know information about that patient, versus they only know maybe our first name and that we work at State of the Heart. So I want to kind of share, put this kind of in a perspective of how the patients may be feeling. So if you think about your deepest, darkest secret, just think of a secret, put that in your head. Now once you have that secret that you wouldn't want anybody to know, imagine if you put that secret down on paper, folded it, put it in an envelope, and had to pass that envelope to someone that you didn't know. Think about the thoughts that might be going through your head at that time. You may be thinking, what are they going to do with that information? Are they going to tell anybody? What are they going to do, with, are they going to open it? Aren't they going to open it? So there's a lot of questions, and also maybe be creating some anxiety about, I really didn't want anybody to know. That may be how our families are feeling, out in the homes, where we have now strangers coming into our home, seeing how we live, seeing how our family doesn't get along, and seeing how my house is not that clean. So, the maybe drama that's going on in the family, that we're privy to that. We see that. But now we have our obligation when we talk about this fiduciary relationship, because it's lopsided and because we have the more dominant side, we have to protect that patient. These families are very vulnerable. And so to build a therapeutic relationship, we recognize that there's this power imbalance. We also want to maintain boundaries and make sure that we are staff going out to visit this patient. We have a care plan. We have established interventions that we need to do, and that we're not out to build friendships with the patients. As well with that is to think about proper boundaries, crossings versus violations, I kind of mentioned earlier. With a boundary, crossing is just kind of stepping over the line. It's really semi-innocent. For example, crossing over the boundaries may be stopping by to visit that patient outside the care plan. You know, it's not advisable. We don't encourage that. That would be a crossing. Versus a blatant violation would be the staff member single, the patient's son is single, and they form a relationship and start dating. That's a violation, and if that staff person was a nurse, they could face actually penalties from the Ohio Board of Nursing. With minimal self-disclosure, we want to make sure when we're out with our families that it's about their journey and that we are sharing information about ourselves that is helpful to them. Going out into the homes, families are going to be curious about staff and volunteers. They're going to ask, questions, where are you from? And, I know as a younger person asking, what family you're from and things like that. Those are all just getting to know you type of questions. But where I talk about minimal self-disclosure would be if you're having a horrible day, your car wouldn't start, you're late to the babysitter. Patients don't need to know that. That's not helpful information. That's not encouraging information for them. And certainly we do not want our patients and families to be worrying about our staff and volunteer when they are going through a very difficult time themselves. So with boundaries, you can ask yourself these questions to know, are you going over the line? Are your actions helping the patient, or do they help yourself? Are they part of the care plan? Who's benefiting? It should always be the patient and the family that benefit from your actions. And would you be embarrassed for anything that you're doing out in the home if your supervisor or coworker found out what you were doing? So we just want to look at these questions and just answer these as we go along. Think about Walter. He has a whole collection of John Grisham novels. Bill loves to read, and he has not read the latest novel. Walter received the latest edition for Christmas, and his eyesight is not what it used to be. So Bill reads a passage from the book at every visit to Walter. Is this appropriate? Is this crossing the boundaries? No, because whether if this is a staff member or a volunteer, they're trying to meet a need for Walter and improve his quality of life. What about Carol? Cared for Mrs. Doyle for a long time. Mrs. Doyle's spouse gives Carol an envelope when leaving one day after the visit. When Carol gets to the car, the envelope has a gift card for $50 to a local eatery. Carol gives the card to her supervisor. Appropriate action? Yes. Per our policy, this is exactly what a patient, staff member, or volunteer should do. Is if we do receive a gift card and we were not able to let the family know we cannot accept this. If we, after the fact find out, they gave me a gift card or, something like that, then we just turn that into our supervisor, and then that would be turned over to HR. What if Kelly did a presentation at the Rotary and the Rotary president hands her a thank you card with Starbucks gift card inside? She used the card on a double venti caramel macchiato and a cranberry scone. This is not appropriate. Across the board, whether it's a clinical staff visiting out in the field or it is an administrative staff, we do not accept honorariums. However, if we do get one, or any kind of gratuity like that we cannot, again, say I cannot accept that, then we say, take it graciously and turn that over to HR. So looking at boundaries, this also can go into characteristics of healthy caring, or it could be over caring, and this can be on off-duty behaviors that really kind of breach that whole team approach. So we're going to kind of look at some scenarios here. So if this is healthy, is this crossing the line? Vicki visits Carol every day. After Carol is discharged from the agency, Vicki continues to visit and run errands. It's probably not healthy if Vicki is continuing on even though the patient is no longer on the program. This could really burn out the volunteer or staff person. The volunteer is often needed by Harold. The volunteer never hesitates to help, sometimes 3 and 4 times a week. Harold calls the volunteer at home and has their cell number. This not healthy. This actually violates our boundary policy that says do not give out your cell phone number. If the patient or their family needs the volunteer, they are instructed to call into the office or get a hold of the after-hours nurse to let them know that they need a volunteer. What about Nettie stops by McDonald's on the way to her visits to patient Jim. He complains that he's hungry at visit. He has limited food in the home. Nettie is trying to be a good person and just help him out. This is also not healthy for a couple of reasons of thinking about what if Nettie's on vacation and another staff member doesn't take McDonald's out to Jim. He could be very upset with that other staff person that didn't bring him food. Or if Jim gets discharged, now who's going to bring Jim food? We really need to think of a healthier way to make sure that Jim has food, and that would be working with social services and that whole team approach to say, this is not just Nettie's problem. Obviously this is, Jim needs a way to make sure that he's got food with or without our agency being involved. And so they may look into food banks or a church or neighbors or something like that that can make sure that Jim has food. What about Donna's dying? The volunteer is called out to sit with a patient. The volunteer sits with the patient for 4 hours. The family doesn't want to be left alone even after this time, so the volunteer accesses the on-call team and lets the nurse know. This is healthy and the appropriate behavior that we would want our volunteers to access our on-call team and let them know that this family still needs support. Agnes is the same age as her patient, Dana. They have children the same age. Agnes and Dana get along great, and Dana has come to depend on Agnes and her visits more and more. Agnes often calls Dana on her weekends to check on her and has occasionally stopped by on her day off. This is very unhealthy. This is an example of crossing that boundary line. Even though it's invisible, this is where Dana is expecting more from Agnes than what the care plan is allowing, and stopping by on days off, again, is that crossing of boundaries. So no policies, acceptance of gratuities, employees accepting money or personal gifts of significant value is not allowed, and also employee volunteer behavior while on the job reflects upon the agency. So accepting, again, gratuities, giving out cell phones, and again, we want to make sure that we are following proper boundaries. Also, we want to kind of lead into ethics and just proper behavior. So we think about these scenarios. Tina is working in the office. She overhears staff members sharing their frustration about a patient's family and how manipulative they are. Tina has been out to the home and she knows this too, but she does not join into the conversation though. She's like, okay, they're gossiping over there. I'm not going to be a part of it. And that's good that she does not join into the gossip that she's overhearing. Supportive or not, Sherry is answering phones. There is much distension between the staff. Sherry goes around to talk to several staff to see what's going on. Not very supportive. Tim is not happy with the way things are going on at the agency. At a chamber luncheon, he shares information about what is happening at the agency with another chamber member. Again, not supportive to the agency mission or goals, talking about anything that might be going on within the agency to our outside referral sources is not appropriate. So looking at ethics, they are a set of values and morals that we obtain in our upbringing. There's also ethical practices that we're providing care that's in a legal manner, that we're following law, rules, regulations, but also is respectful and provides to that patient's quality of life. Work ethics reflect our agency's mission, and it also can be very subjective, and people have their own personal interpretation. But here's some ethical principles we definitely want to follow. The fidelity is establishing trust. We cannot build a therapeutic relationship with our families if they can't trust us. And obviously by building trust is by doing what we say we're going to do. Beneficence and non-maleficence go together, where we're also maintaining or promoting that patient's well-being without causing harm. Veracity is the duty to tell the truth. Autonomy and informed consent go together, where autonomy is that I am able to make the decision without any kind of constraints. There's no ands, ifs, or but in being able to make a decision. But obviously to make a decision, I have to be informed. I have to know the benefits, the risks that are involved, and have adequate information in order to make that informed consent. And then justice is distributing resources fairly and making sure that what we would do for one patient, that we're doing for all, and that we wouldn't give preference to any one patient over another. Unethical practices to avoid would be fraud, obviously filing false claims, falsifying documentation, charting things that we didn't do is not appropriate and unlawful. Joint venture is businesses referring patients in exchange for benefits. Actually, that's unlawful. There is actually in regulation newsletter where there's administrators and that are getting into quite the hot water for giving kickbacks to their medical directors for referring patients. Unbundling would be separating claims that should have been billed together. So with hospice, if we are supposed to be covering, all of the patient's medication related to the terminal illness, we can't unbundle some of that medication and say, oh, their prescription plan is going to pay for that, or Medicare Part D is going to pay for that. If we knowingly do that practice, that's unethical. We do have an ethics committee that if there's any kind of ethical issues, such as there's a conflict between the patient's welfare and their right for or against a treatment, or if it's a discrepancy about prolonging life versus maximizing quality of life, discontinuing G-tube feedings or not, withdrawing life-sustaining treatment, a ventilator, we're going to stop the ventilator, we're not going to stop the ventilator. If families aren't in agreement, that's where the ethics committee could come into play. Any employee, volunteer, patient, family member of the community can identify concerns and request a consultation with our ethics committee, and they just provide the resources and provide a forum for discussing these concerns. Martin Luther King, I'm just leaving you with this little quote, "The time is always right to do what is right." So a couple of scenarios when we think about ethics. Again, it's a subjective. There is maybe no right or exact wrong, but something to think about. If Mrs. Bettler lives in a skilled nursing facility, her living will states no emergency interventions. One day she has a medical crisis and the skilled nursing staff calls 911. Mrs. Bettler is now in the ER. what is the best action to take? Well, there's multiple different things that we could do in this scenario, but definitely as a hospice, knowing her, she's got a living will, she's got advance directive, that we would be her voice, and making sure that the hospital knows what her preferences are. And that would probably be the case manager nurse or maybe the after-hour nurse that would go to the hospital. What about Mr. Talon? He lives at home alone. One day he tells you that he has a gun beside his bed because he's afraid of being alone and will only use it if someone is breaking in, but he asks you not to tell anyone. With this scenario, obviously staff safety, patient safety is something that we might be concerned about. If Mr. Talon said, I have 50 guns in a locked gun cabinet, it might be a different scenario, and he's, proudly showing you, he was a big hunter, but that's not the case. He's talking about, I have a gun right here beside my bed, it's loaded, and I really don't want you to tell anybody. That would be concerning. So obviously, if safety is an issue, we would definitely share that with the case manager, social worker, supervisor. So things to think about, with ethics, boundaries, fiduciary relationships, that whose needs are primary. And again, it's always going to be the patient and our family's needs that are primary. Also thinking about our actions, if there's any negative consequences that could happen, could there be any negative effect on the team or the patient, or even our, public image or our, community image based on our actions. Thank you.